The boardroom on the 47th floor of Halcyon Pierce Global always smelled the same polished wood, recycled air, and quiet tension. I had spent 14 years learning how to survive in that atmosphere. My name is Melora Scott, Senior Liaison for Strategic Acquisitions, and at that moment, I was finalizing the last details of a $3.1 billion merger deal I had spent 9 months building from chaos into precision. I stood by the window, reviewing clauses on my tablet, when the door suddenly slammed open. If you're curious what happened the moment that door slammed open and how it all led to a shocking ending, go ahead and hit the like button on this video. And tell me, if you've been listening from the start, what time is it where you are right now? I'll show you exactly who walked through that door. The sharp sound cut through the room. Then came the heels fast, loud, and deliberate. "Excuse me." I turned slowly. A young woman stood there, perfect white suit, controlled posture, and a confidence that felt rehearsed. Vanessa Hale, the VP's daughter, first day. Her eyes moved over me, not with curiosity, but judgment. "Can I help you?" I asked calmly. "I know who you are," she said, lifting a thick employee handbook. "Melora Scott." She stepped closer. "And I know what you're doing wrong." I paused. Not surprised, just observing. "I'm preparing for the Sterling Lions merger," I replied evenly. "We close in 48 hours. "No," she snapped. "You're violating Code 4B, client-facing dress standards." The room went silent. I glanced down at my charcoal blazer. "My dress code?" I asked. She pointed at me. "Non-standard buttons. And that bag, distressed leather. Completely inappropriate." I looked back at her. "Steady. Vanessa, I'm meeting Daniel Lyons in 48 hours to finalize a $3.1 billion deal." "This isn't the issue." Her expression tightened. "I am the VP's chief of staff," she said firmly. "If you can't follow basic rules, how can you be trusted with the company's future?" There it was. Not about clothes. About power. "Go home," she added. "Change. And write an apology to HR." I held her gaze. "No." Her eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me, I have work to do," I said, turning back. That's when she snapped. "You're fired." The words echoed across the room. I turned back. Calm. "You can't be serious. I am your superior," she said, voice rising. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out." I looked at her, then at my tablet, then back at her. And suddenly, everything became clear. "Okay," I said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. She expected resistance, not agreement. "Standards matter," I added, closing my tablet. "You're right." Then, I walked past her. She thought she had just asserted control. She didn't realize she had just destroyed a $3.1 billion deal. And just a quick note, this story is fictional, enhanced with AI to make it more engaging and meaningful. Most importantly, it's here to share some powerful lessons. Let's experience it together. She thought she had just asserted control. She was wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look back at her again. People expect conflict in moments like that. They expect emotion, resistance, something dramatic they can whisper about later. But silence can be far more unsettling than any outburst. I walked out of the boardroom at a steady pace, my heels echoing softly against the polished floor. The sound carried farther than usual. Or maybe everyone was just listening more closely. Through the glass walls, I could see the analysts and junior associates frozen at their desks. Screens glowed, untouched. Coffee cups hovered midair. No one dared to move. They all understood something was wrong. They just didn't understand how wrong. I passed them without slowing down. A few of them lowered their eyes as I walked by, as if avoiding eye contact might shield them from whatever had just happened. Others stared openly, confusion written across their faces. They had seen people reprimanded before. They had seen people pushed out, but not like this. Not over something so absurd. not someone like me. At the end of the hallway, I paused for half a second, just enough to take in the reflection staring back at me in the glass. Calm, composed, untouched, on the surface. Nothing had changed, but everything had. Vanessa didn't know it yet. But that moment in the boardroom wasn't impulsive. It wasn't just a reckless decision made by someone inexperienced. It was something far more dangerous. It was a complete misunderstanding of power, of leverage, of the invisible threads that held this company together. And she had just cut one of the most important ones. I continued walking toward my office, my mind already shifting into a different mode. Not defensive, not reactive, strategic. Years in this industry had taught me one thing above all else. The most devastating consequences rarely happen in the moment. They unfold quietly, step by step, long after people think the decision has already been made. Behind me, I could feel the tension spreading like a ripple through the floor. Conversations would start soon. Quiet at first, then louder. Questions would surface. Who authorized this? What happens to the merger? Who takes over? There would be no answers. Not yet. As I reached my office door, I rested my hand on the handle for a brief moment. This room had been my command center for years. Every negotiation, every strategy, every high-stakes decision had passed through here. And now, just like that, it was no longer mine. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The silence in the room felt different, heavier, more deliberate. For the first time since she spoke those words, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, because I finally understood something she didn't. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a very expensive mistake. My office didn't look like the rest of the floor, while the boardroom was sterile and controlled. This space carried the quiet weight of real work. Stacks of documents arranged in patterns only I understood. Handwritten notes layered over printed reports. A system built not for appearance, but for execution. I closed the door behind me and set my tablet down on the desk. No rush, no panic. Rushing suggests fear, and I felt none. I opened the top drawer and began with the personal items, a framed photo of my father. The man who taught me that patience always outlasts arrogance. A crystal paperweight Daniel Lyons had given me after we closed a deal in Singapore years ago. Small things, but each carried meaning. Each reminded me that value isn't always visible at first glance. Then I reached for the leather-bound contact book sitting at the corner of my desk. Most people in this building believed everything important lived on servers, locked behind passwords and firewalls. They trusted systems. They trusted digital trails. They were wrong. The real deals, the real leverage, lived here. Private numbers, unspoken agreements, relationships built over years, not recorded in any database. I picked it up and placed it carefully into my bag. A soft knock came from the door. Melora. I turned. It was Elena, my assistant. Her face was pale, her hands nervously twisting a tissue. Is it true? She asked quietly. Did she actually fire you? Yes, I said, keeping my voice calm. Her eyes widened. But the merger, the meeting is in 2 days. No one else knows the structure, the leverage ratios, the side clauses. No one has the full picture. I held her gaze for a moment. I'm sure Vanessa will handle it. I replied. The words sounded smooth, but we both knew what they meant. Elena swallowed hard. This is going to fall apart. I didn't respond. I simply turned back to my desk. The files in front of me were the official copies of the merger, clean, complete, and completely insufficient. They contained the numbers, the projections, the formal agreements. What they didn't contain were the nuances, the unspoken conditions, the human elements that actually held the deal together. I picked up one folder, flipped through it slowly, then set it back down in the center of the desk, right where it belonged. I powered down my computer and logged out of every system, cleared my access, removed my credentials, wiped the local traces of my work, not deleting anything that belonged to the company. just removing the shortcuts that existed only because I had built them. If they wanted to navigate this deal, they would have to do it the hard way. Without me, I slipped on my coat, feeling the familiar weight settle around my shoulders. It felt different now, lighter, somehow. When I stepped back into the hallway, the atmosphere had shifted. People were pretending to work again, but the illusion was fragile. Eyes flickered toward me, then away. Conversations stopped the moment I passed. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone could feel it. Something critical had just been removed, and no one knew how to replace it. Near the elevators, Vanessa was waiting, arms crossed, expression tight. Two security guards standing awkwardly beside her. "Make sure she doesn't take anything proprietary," she said sharply, not even looking at me. One of the guards, a man who had seen me work late nights for years, hesitated. "She's clear," he muttered without checking my bag. Vanessa scoffed. "Just get her out." I pressed the elevator button and waited. The silence between us stretched. When the doors opened, I turned to her. She was expecting something. Anger, bitterness, a reaction she could use to justify herself. Instead, I smiled. "Thank you," I said. Her brow furrowed. "For what? For clarifying how this place works," I replied calmly. "It's been very informative." Confusion flickered across her face. "Just for a second. Good luck with the merger," I added. "You'll need it." I stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, she took a step forward. "What do you mean by that?" she demanded. I held her gaze. "Some details aren't written down," I said softly. The doors slid shut before she could respond. As the elevator descended, I checked my watch. It was 10:15 a.m. By noon, questions would start. By afternoon, the cracks would show. And by tomorrow morning, the consequences would begin. The elevator doors opened into the lobby, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Upstairs, everything had been controlled tension. Down here, it was quiet, almost detached, like the building itself didn't yet realize what had just happened on the 47th floor. I stepped out without hesitation, my reflection briefly catching in the polished marble walls. Same posture, same calm expression. Nothing about me suggested I had just been fired. That was intentional. The security guards followed a few steps behind, more out of obligation than enforcement. They weren't watching me closely. They didn't need to. Everyone in this building knew I wasn't the type to cause a scene. I walked across the lobby at a steady pace, the sound of my heels echoing cleanly against the floor. A few people near the reception desk glanced up, then quickly looked away. Word hadn't spread yet, but instinct told them something was off. Glass doors stood ahead, sunlight pouring in from the street outside. For a brief second, I slowed, not out of hesitation, but awareness. That threshold marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of something else. Behind me, I could feel it. Vanessa's presence, still upstairs, still convinced she had just won something. She had no idea. I pushed the doors open and stepped outside. The city air felt different, warmer, less filtered, real. I didn't stop on the sidewalk. I didn't look back. I simply walked forward, letting the noise of traffic and distant voices replace the artificial silence I had just left behind. 2 blocks later, I paused at the corner. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to think. Most people, after something like that, would be replaying the moment, questioning it, second-guessing every word, every reaction. I didn't, because I already understood the outcome. Vanessa believed she had enforced authority. She believed she had corrected a minor violation, removed a problem, and asserted control in front of an audience. What she had actually done was far more significant. She had removed the only person who understood the full structure of a deal that couldn't survive partial knowledge. She had mistaken visibility for value, and that kind of mistake doesn't fail immediately. It unravels, quietly. I checked my watch again. 10:23 a.m. Upstairs. The timeline had already started moving. Legal would begin asking questions soon. Someone would notice a missing detail. Then another. Calls would be made. Files would be opened. And slowly, the realization would begin to form. Not all at once. Just enough to create unease. I crossed the street and continued walking. My pace unhurried. There was no urgency anymore. No pressure. No expectation to fix what others had broken. For the first time in years. I wasn't responsible for holding everything together. That responsibility now belonged to someone who didn't even know where to look. I allowed myself a small smile. Not out of satisfaction. Out of certainty. Because I had seen this pattern before. Not in deals. Not in contracts. But in people. The moment someone confuses position with capability, they create a gap between what they believe they control and what they actually understand. And that gap always widens. Eventually, it collapses. I reached a quiet cafe and stopped outside for a moment, glancing through the window at the calm interior. A few people sat with laptops, others with coffee, completely unaware that somewhere just a few blocks away, a multi-billion-dollar structure had already begun to fracture. I stepped inside, for now. There was nothing to do, no calls to answer, no decisions to make, just time and patience, because whatever was about to happen next was no longer my problem. I ordered a double espresso and chose a seat by the window, angled just enough to catch the street without being seen. The cafe was quiet. The kind of place where people spoke in low voices and time moved slower. It felt almost unreal compared to the pressure I had left behind less than 15 minutes ago. I set my bag down beside me and wrapped my hands around the cup when it arrived. Warm, steady, predictable, for the first time in years. Nothing was urgent. No calls demanding immediate answers. No last-minute revisions. No negotiations balanced on the edge of collapse. Just silence. I took a slow sip and let it settle. Freedom, I realized, doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, almost unnoticed, until you realize the weight you were carrying is gone, across the city. However, silence was not what they were experiencing. By now, someone in legal had opened the merger files and noticed something didn't align. A clause that referenced an appendix no one could locate. A note that hinted at a secondary agreement that wasn't documented anywhere official. At first, it would seem like a minor oversight. Then another missing detail would surface. And another. I could picture it clearly. Analysts pulling up files, scrolling faster, searching for something that wasn't there. Managers asking questions that no one could answer. Voices rising just slightly, still controlled, but no longer calm. I took another sip of coffee. The structure of the deal had always been layered. On the surface, it looked complete, every number accounted for, every projection justified. But the real foundation had never been the documents. It had been understanding. The appendices weren't just files. They were conversations, agreements built on trust, nuance, and context. They lived in handwritten notes, in memory, in the subtle adjustments made during negotiations that never made it into formal records. And now, those pieces were gone, not deleted, just absent. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, turning it over in my hand for a moment before setting it face down on the table. No need to check it yet. I already knew what I would find. Calls, messages, urgency, upstairs. Vanessa would still believe she had control. She would be reviewing the same documents, convinced that everything important was in front of her. She would see the numbers, the summaries, the polished version of the deal, but she wouldn't see the gaps, not immediately. Those take time to reveal themselves. I leaned back slightly, watching people pass by outside. The city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars stopped and started. Pedestrians crossed without hesitation. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that a multi-billion-dollar agreement was beginning to unravel just a few blocks away. Another sip. I imagined the first call coming in from the Lions team, A simple check-in, a clarification request, something small. Vanessa would answer confidently. Of course she would. She would rely on what she could see, what she could read, and for a moment, it might even sound convincing, until the conversation shifted, until they asked about something specific, something not in the files, something only understood if you had been there from the beginning. That's when the hesitation would start. Brief at first, then noticeable. And once hesitation enters a negotiation like that, it spreads quickly. I exhaled slowly. This was the part people never anticipate. They think removing a person removes a problem. They don't consider that sometimes the person is the system, and without that system, everything else becomes unstable. I glanced at my phone again. Still untouched. Soon. They would realize. Soon. The calls would stop being routine and start becoming urgent. But for now, I stayed exactly where I was. Calm, still, and completely out of reach. It wasn't until early evening that I finally turned my phone back on. I had spent the rest of the afternoon drifting through the city with no destination, no schedule, and no pressure to be anywhere. I walked through an art gallery, stood in front of abstract paintings longer than necessary, and noticed details I would have ignored just a day ago. It was strange how much space opened up when responsibility disappeared. By the time I returned to my apartment, the sky had already dimmed into a soft gray blue. I poured myself a glass of wine, set my bag down, and sat near the window overlooking the city. Only then did I reach for my phone. The moment the screen lit up, it started vibrating. Not once, not twice, constantly. I waited a full minute before unlocking it, letting the flood of notifications settle. Missed calls stacked one after another. Messages layered over each other in rapid succession. Elna. Multiple times. Unknown numbers. Internal extensions. And then emails. Dozens of them. I opened the first message from Elena. Melora. Legal is asking who authorized your termination. Vanessa locked herself in her office. The next one came barely an hour later. The Lions team called. Vanessa took it. It didn't go well. Another. Where are the appendix files? She says they're missing. Everyone is asking. I exhaled slowly. Scrolling through the rest, the tone had shifted. Early confusion turning into urgency. Urgency turning into something closer to panic. I opened an email from the HR director. Subject line: urgent clarification required. The message was carefully worded, almost overly polite, a misunderstanding. They called it a breakdown in communication. They wanted to discuss reinstating my position immediately before the upcoming meeting. They emphasized the importance of maintaining stability. Stability? I let out a quiet breath. Setting the glass of wine down. They always framed it that way when something valuable slipped through their hands. Not as a mistake, not as a failure, but as something external, something emotional, something that could be corrected if everyone just cooperated. Another message followed, this time from one of the senior partners. Short, direct. Call me. We need to fix this. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it again. No response. Not because I didn't understand the situation, because I understood it perfectly. They weren't reaching out because they respected what I did. They were reaching out because they were beginning to understand what they had lost. There's a difference. I stood up and walked toward the window, looking down at the city lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere in one of those buildings, conversations were escalating, voices getting sharper, questions becoming accusations. Vanessa, by now, would no longer be confident. She would be searching, demanding answers, trying to reconstruct something she had never fully understood in the first place, and every time she thought she found a solution, another gap would appear. I picked up my phone again, glancing at a new message that had just come in. This one wasn't internal. It was from a number I recognized immediately, the private line of Halcyon Pierce's CFO. Melora, pick up, name your price. I looked at the message for a few seconds before setting the phone back down. That was the moment everything became clear. Not earlier, not in the boardroom. Here, when they finally stopped pretending it was about policy and admitted, without saying it directly, that it was about value. But value isn't something you negotiate after it's been dismissed. It's something you recognize before you lose it. I walked back to the couch and sat down, letting the silence return. They wanted to fix the situation. They wanted to undo the decision. They wanted control again, but control had already shifted, and I had no intention of giving it back. Not tonight. Tonight. I let the phone sit untouched beside me and listened to the quiet. There are still many unexpected twists ahead, and it only gets more intense from here. If you're curious to see what happens next, don't forget to like the video and stay with me till the end. There is a drawer in my apartment that I rarely open. It doesn't hold jewelry or cash. It holds leverage. I walked over to the antique desk in the corner of my living room and pulled a small key from beneath a ceramic tray. The lock clicked open with a soft, deliberate sound. Inside, resting against dark velvet lining, was a single leather folder, worn edges, faded gold lettering. Most people at Halcyon Pierce believed I was hired because of my experience, my resume, my track record. That wasn't the full story. 5 years ago, when the Lyons family first considered outside capital, they had one condition. They wanted someone who understood them, not just their numbers, but their history, their way of thinking, the quiet rules that don't appear in contracts. My father had once worked closely with them. I grew up around those conversations, those expectations. I wasn't just an employee brought in to close a deal. I was the bridge. I opened the folder slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number written in ink. No company line, no assistant, just a direct connection. Calling it meant crossing a line. It meant stepping outside the boundaries of my former role. But those boundaries no longer applied. I picked up my phone and dialed. It rang twice. Julian Lyons. His voice was calm, measured, and immediately recognizable. "It's Melora Scott," I said. There was a pause on the line. Not confusion, recognition. "I thought we were in a quiet period until signing," he replied. "We were," I said evenly. But something changed. The shift in tone was immediate. "What happened? I was terminated this morning." Silence followed. Not brief, not casual, heavy. "Terminated," he repeated. Slower this time. "By whom?" "The VP's office. A policy issue, dress code." "Technically." Another pause. Longer than the first. "And who is handling the transition now?" "No one," I said. "They believe the files are sufficient." I heard a quiet exhale on the other end. "They're not," he said flatly. "I know." He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need to. The real structure of the deal had never been in the files. It lived in interpretation, in context, in knowing which clauses were negotiable and which ones were untouchable. Without that, the entire agreement was fragile. They removed the only person who understood the full framework. He said, "That appears to be the situation." The line went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not shock. Calculation. "Melora," he said after a moment. His voice lower now, more deliberate. "Are you available tomorrow morning?" "Yes. 8 o'clock. The Ardent Hotel. We'll speak there." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there. And Melora," he added, just before ending the call. "Do not sign anything with them. No agreements, no revisions, nothing. I won't." The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly, feeling the weight of what had just shifted. This was no longer about a job, no longer about a misunderstanding or a reversal. This was alignment. I closed the folder and locked the drawer again. The room felt different now. Not like a place to rest, but a place to think, to plan. Across the city, they were still trying to repair something they didn't fully understand, still believing the situation could be contained, corrected, reversed. They were already too late. because the one element they needed most had already moved. And tomorrow morning, everything would change. The Ardent Hotel had the kind of quiet elegance that made every conversation feel important. Soft lighting, muted colors, and a level of discretion that didn't need to be advertised. Deals had been shaped here long before I ever stepped into corporate boardrooms. I arrived a few minutes early, not out of habit, out of respect. Julian Lyons was already seated when I entered. Navy suit, precise posture, the same composed presence that had defined every negotiation we'd ever had. He didn't stand when I approached, but his eyes followed me closely. Measuring. Assessing. Melora. He said simply, "Julian." I took the seat across from him. No small talk, no distractions. That wasn't how this worked. "They called my office this morning," he began, buttering a piece of toast with slow precision. "A young woman, Vanessa Hale." I didn't react. "She informed my legal team that you were unavailable due to a sudden health issue." He continued, "Exhaustion. Apparently, she assured us she had been fully briefed." I set my cup down, "So she's buying time." Julian gave a faint, humorless smile. "She believes she can manage the conversation without you. She can't, I'm aware." He paused, studying me more carefully now. "Do they understand what they've done?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Not yet." That answer seemed to satisfy him. He leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. "The clause regarding the Montana asset," he said. "It appears minor in the documents, non-revenue generating land, but without your interpretation, they'll treat it as a liability." I finished, and attempt to restructure it. "And in doing so," he said quietly, "they'll dismantle the foundation of the agreement." Neither of us spoke for a moment. That was the reality of it. Not a delay, not a complication, a collapse waiting to happen. They removed the only person who understood the intent behind the structure. Julian said finally, 48 hours before closing. "Yes." "And they expect the deal to hold." "Yes." He let out a slow breath, then reached into his briefcase. "I don't do business with uncertainty," he said. "And I certainly don't do business with people who misrepresent facts." He placed a document on the table and slid it toward me. "This is a consultancy agreement," he added. I glanced down at it. It wasn't a revision of the existing deal. It was something entirely different. "My holding group is restructuring its acquisition strategy," he continued. "I need someone who understands both sides of this negotiation, someone who can navigate complexity without relying on surface-level data." I looked back up at him. "You're offering me a position. I'm offering you control." He corrected calmly. "Director of Strategic Acquisitions. You would oversee the transition process directly." The implication was clear. Not returning to Halcyon Pierce, moving beyond it. "The compensation is significantly higher than your previous role," he added. "Equity included." I didn't respond immediately, because the decision wasn't about numbers. It was about alignment. "Why me?" I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, Julian's expression didn't change. "Because you're the only one who understands what this deal actually is," he said. "And more importantly, what it isn't." Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt different. Not tension. Clarity. I reached for the pen resting beside the document. "Your first assignment," he continued, as I opened the contract, "would be to reassess the current structure and determine whether Halcyon Pierce remains a viable partner." A brief pause, and if it doesn't, his gaze held mine. "Then we move forward without them." I signed my name without hesitation. The moment the pen left the paper, everything shifted, not gradually, completely. Julian nodded once. "Satisfied. Good," he said. "Then we're aligned." I closed the folder and set it aside. For the first time since yesterday morning, the path ahead was clear, not reactive, not uncertain, deliberate, across the city. They were still trying to repair something they no longer controlled. They just didn't realize it yet. But they would soon, very soon, by late afternoon. The narrative inside Halcyon Pierce had already begun to shift. Not toward the truth, toward damage control. Vanessa wasn't trying to fix the problem. She was trying to contain it. And the easiest way to contain something you don't understand is to lie about it the next morning. I sat inside a small cafe directly across from the Halcyon Pierce Tower. The glass facade reflected the gray sky above, but I could still see inside the lobby. Movement, tension, people walking faster than usual. Beside me sat Adrian Cole, Julian's executive assistant, impeccably dressed, composed, and observant. The kind of person who didn't need to speak much to understand everything happening in a room. "She's already called twice this morning," Adrian said calmly, glancing at his watch. "I blocked her number," I replied, lifting my cup. "Smart." We sat in silence for a moment, watching. Then I saw her. Vanessa. She was pacing near the reception desk, her posture tight, her movements sharp and restless. She spoke rapidly to someone behind the counter, then turned toward the entrance, then back again. She was waiting, trying to control the scene before it unfolded. "She told our legal team you were hospitalized," Adrian said casually. "Severe exhaustion." I let out a quiet breath. "So that's the story. It buys her time." He added, "If you're unavailable, the deal doesn't collapse immediately. It delays the consequences," I said. "It doesn't remove them." Across the street, Vanessa suddenly stopped moving. Her gaze shifted outward, scanning. Then it locked. On us. Even from this distance, I saw the exact moment recognition hit. Her entire body froze. Her posture changed instantly, tension replaced by something sharper, something closer to panic. She stepped closer to the glass, pressing forward slightly as if distance might be distorting what she was seeing. It wasn't. She saw me. And more importantly, she saw who I was sitting with. Adrian didn't react. He simply adjusted his sleeve and took a sip of his coffee. "She knows," I said quietly. "Good," he replied. Vanessa grabbed her phone immediately, dialing quickly. Her movements were no longer controlled. They were frantic. My phone remained silent. "She's trying to reach you," Adrian noted. "She won't." Across the street, her frustration escalated. She spoke rapidly into the phone, then pulled it away, dialing again. When nothing changed, she turned sharply and said something to the receptionist, pointing in our direction. The receptionist shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. Vanessa spun around and rushed toward the elevators. "She's going upstairs," I said. "To rewrite the story," Adrian replied calmly. But we both knew it was already too late. Once doubt enters a system like that, it spreads faster than any explanation can contain it. I leaned back slightly, watching the reflection of the building shift with the changing light. "She thinks she can manage the room," I said. "She thinks she can manage perception," Adrian corrected. A brief pause. "Marcus is 5 minutes away." I nodded. Everything was aligning exactly as expected. Across the street, the lobby settled again, but the stillness felt artificial, temporary, like the quiet before something breaks. I finished my coffee and set the cup down carefully. There was no urgency in my movements, no need for it, because the outcome was already set in motion. Vanessa had built her version of reality on incomplete information, on assumptions, on the belief that authority could replace understanding. Now, that version was about to collide with something she couldn't control, something she couldn't explain away. Adrian checked his watch again. "Time," he said simply. I stood up, adjusting my coat. Across the street, the glass doors of Halcyon Pierce reflected a sleek black car pulling up to the curb. Julian Lyons stepped out, calm, composed, unhurried. He didn't look toward the cafe. He didn't need to. He already knew exactly where I was and what was about to happen next. I took one last look at the building, then stepped toward the door. Because the truth was about to walk inside. The lobby of Halcyon Pierce was designed to impress, but that morning it felt like a stage. Everything was in place. The marble floors, the waterfall feature, the polished reception desk. But the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was tension stretched thin. I stepped through the revolving doors just as the scene began to unfold. Julian Lyons stood at the center of the lobby, still and composed, his presence commanding without effort. He hadn't moved toward the elevators. He was waiting. Vanessa stood in front of him, slightly out of breath, her perfect composure starting to crack. Beside her were the CFO and General Counsel, both visibly uneasy, their attention fixed on Julian. I slowed my steps, positioning myself just close enough to hear, but not interrupt. Unforeseen circumstances, Vanessa was saying, her voice tight but controlled. Melora is currently unavailable. She's dealing with a sudden medical issue, but she fully briefed me before Julian raised a hand. Unavailable, he repeated, his voice calm but cutting. Yes, she said quickly. She's been hospitalized. Exhaustion. A brief silence followed. Then Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. That's interesting, he said, glancing at the screen. Because I received a message from her this morning. Vanessa froze. Her expression didn't change all at once. It fractured, slowly. What? The CFO asked sharply. Julian lifted his gaze, scanning the lobby. His eyes found me. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply acknowledged. Vanessa turned and saw me, standing there, calm, composed, exactly where she had claimed I couldn't be. For a second. No one spoke. Then everything collapsed at once. She's lying, Vanessa stammered, her voice breaking. I fired her. She's not part of this anymore. The words came out too fast, too loud, and far too late. The CFO turned toward her, disbelief flashing across his face. You did what Julian's expression hardened. The shift immediate and unmistakable. You terminated the lead liaison, he said slowly. 2 days before closing, Vanessa tried to recover, her voice rising. She violated company policy, dress code standards. Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. You ended a $3.1 billion negotiation over buttons. Silence slammed into the room. The CFO stepped forward quickly. Mr. Lyons, this is a misunderstanding. We can resolve it immediately. We'll reinstate her. Julian didn't even look at him. He was still watching Vanessa. You misrepresented facts to my legal team, he said. You lied about her status, and you removed the only individual who understood the structure of this agreement. Vanessa's composure shattered completely. I was enforcing standards, she insisted, but the words sounded weak now, defensive, hollow. Julian turned slightly, addressing the executives beside her. Is this the leadership I'm expected to trust with a transaction of this scale? He asked. No one answered, because there was nothing to say. Julian's gaze shifted back to me. Melora, he said calmly. Are you currently employed by this company? I stepped forward. No, I replied. My employment was terminated yesterday morning. That was all he needed. Then you have no authority to represent them, he said, turning back to the group. And they have no one qualified to represent themselves. The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. The CFO tried again, desperation creeping in. We can fix this. We'll correct the situation immediately. Just give us, no, Julian interrupted. One word, clear, absolute. The meeting is over. Vanessa's face went pale. You can't just walk away, she said, her voice almost pleading now. We have a signed term sheet. Julian looked at her as if the statement meant nothing. Term sheets rely on good faith, he said coldly. You've demonstrated none. He turned without another word and walked toward the exit. The moment he moved, the entire room seemed to collapse behind him. Voices rose, questions exploded. Panic spread faster than anyone could contain it. And just like that, the deal was gone. Not delayed, not damaged. Gone. I watched for a second longer, then turned as well, because there was nothing left for me inside that building anymore. Only consequences. And they had just begun, the moment Julian walked out. The silence he left behind didn't last. It shattered. The CFO turned on Vanessa so fast it looked almost violent. His composure gone, replaced by something raw and unfiltered. "You fired her!" he roared, his voice echoing across the marble lobby. Without consulting legal, without informing the board, Vanessa stumbled back a step, her confidence gone. Replaced by panic, she was insubordinate, she said. But the words lacked conviction now. She violated policy. I was enforcing standards. You were destroying the company, he snapped, cutting her off. The general counsel said nothing. He didn't need to. His expression said enough. Vanessa looked around, searching for support, for someone to validate her decision. No one moved. No one spoke. The room had turned on her completely. Then her eyes landed on me. "This is your fault," she said suddenly, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "You set this up. You knew exactly what you were doing." I held her gaze, calm and steady. "I chose my outfit this morning," I said quietly. "Everything else was your decision." That was when it fully hit her, not just what had happened, but what it meant. The CFO turned toward me then, his tone shifting instantly, desperation replacing anger. "Melora," he said, stepping closer. "We can fix this. This doesn't have to end here." I didn't respond. "We'll reinstate you immediately," he continued. "Senior position, increased compensation, whatever you need. Just call Julian. Tell him it was a mistake. A mistake." The word lingered in the air. I studied him for a moment. This was a man I had worked under for years. A man who had never once questioned my value when things were running smoothly. Who had never needed to. Until now. "It's not about compensation," I said. "It can be." He insisted quickly. "We'll double it if we have to. Just tell us what it takes." I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder. He watched closely, hope flickering in his expression. "What is that?" he asked. "My formal acknowledgement?" I replied calmly. "Not a resignation, something more final." "You can't just walk away," he said, the urgency returning. "We need you to stabilize this." "I can't," I said. "Why not?" "Because the situation had already moved beyond their control. Because I've already accepted another position." I answered. The words landed harder than anything else I had said. The CFO froze. With who, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I didn't rush the answer. "The client," I said, for a second. No one reacted. Then the realization hit. "You're working with lions?" he asked, his voice dropping. "Yes." The shift in the room was immediate. Everything they had been trying to salvage was no longer theirs to control. The negotiation hadn't ended. It had simply moved to the other side. The CFO took a step back, his expression collapsing under the weight of it. "You switched sides," he said, almost to himself. "I aligned with value," I corrected quietly. Vanessa stared at me, her face pale, her earlier arrogance completely gone. "You worked here for years," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with something closer to clarity. "I did work here," I said, "and I did exactly what was expected of me, until you decided that wasn't enough." No one spoke after that, because there was nothing left to argue. No version of this ended with them regaining control. No version of this brought the deal back. I closed the folder and slipped it back into my bag. Behind me, phones were already ringing again, voices rising, the first signs of a much larger collapse beginning to take shape. I turned toward the exit. "Melora," the CFO called after me. One last attempt. We can still negotiate. I paused briefly, then shook my head. Not today, I said, and this time. When I walked away, I didn't look back. 3 days later, the consequences were no longer contained behind glass walls. They were public. Halcyon Pierce's stock had dropped nearly 20%, and the headlines were already forming their narrative. Leadership instability, failed negotiations, internal mismanagement. The market didn't care about explanations. It reacted to outcomes, and the outcome was clear. The deal was gone, in a final attempt to stop the collapse. The board arranged another meeting. This time, there were no illusions, no false confidence, only urgency. They asked Julian to return. He agreed, on one condition. Everyone would be present, including Vanessa. The boardroom felt different when I walked in behind him. The same space where everything had started now carried the weight of what had followed. No one spoke as we entered. Eyes followed us, tense and uncertain. Vanessa sat at the far end of the table. Gone was the sharp confidence, the perfect posture. In its place was something smaller, controlled, but fragile. Julian took his seat without a word. This meeting, the CEO began, his voice tight, is to discuss restoring the original agreement. Julian didn't open his briefcase. I'm not here to restore anything, he said calmly. I'm here to make an offer. The room stilled. 30 cents on the dollar, he continued. The CFO's reaction was immediate. That's unacceptable. We were at 3.1 billion. That was before. Julian replied, before you removed the only person who made that valuation possible. His gaze shifted toward me briefly, then back to the room. The structure is compromised. The partners have lost confidence. What remains is significantly less valuable. Silence followed, heavy, desperate. Then the CEO turned to me. Melora, he said carefully, you can fix this. Come back. We'll give you whatever position you want. Just help us close the original deal, for a moment. Everything paused. The offer hung in the air. Power, control, restoration, everything they had refused to recognize before, now placed directly in front of me. I looked at Vanessa. Her eyes met mine, filled with something between regret and disbelief. Then I looked back at the CEO and smiled. Softly. She fired me, I said. A brief pause, then, clearly, no deal. Julian stood. That was the end of it. Chairs shifted. Voices tried to rise, but nothing formed into words strong enough to change the outcome. We walked out together, leaving the silence behind us. This time, I didn't feel the weight of the building. I didn't feel the pressure, for the first time in years. I felt nothing but certainty, because the story hadn't ended in that boardroom. It had ended the moment someone confused authority with understanding, and everything that followed was simply the cost of that mistake. Through this story, I realized something important sometimes. The moment you are pushed out is actually the moment your true value is revealed. I walked away not because I lost, but because I finally understood where I truly belonged. From this experience, I learned 5 powerful lessons. First, your value doesn't disappear just because someone fails to recognize it. Second, real power comes from knowledge and understanding, not titles or authority. Third, never beg to stay where you are not respected. Fourth, patience and calmness in difficult moments will always give you the advantage. And finally, sometimes the best revenge is not fighting back, but moving forward and letting the results speak for you. And what about you? Did this story remind you of something in your own life? I'd really love to hear what lesson you took away from it. Share it in the comments so we can all learn from each other. If this story made you think or feel something, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need it. Your voice, your story, and your perspective truly matter in this community.
Welcome to Boardroom Revenge Stories, a channel focused on workplace conflict, corporate betrayal, power struggles, and quiet justice. Our stories follow a structured workflow to deliver a consistent, immersive experience. We start by analyzing real discussions on Reddit, Facebook, Quora, and blogs. Next, we craft original scripts using AI tools like ChatGPT. We then use 11 Labs to transform text into high-quality voice and edit everything in CapCut for a smooth, cinematic finish. Thumbnails are designed with Canva, and every video is carefully reviewed before release. These stories go beyond entertainment, revealing how power truly works and how justice quietly unfolds.